Marcus Bennett spent years building a company from the shadows, closing deals, fixing crises, carrying success no one credited him for. Yet when recognition came, it went to others. When promotion came, he was denied for reasons never spoken aloud. So he walked away. They responded with a lawsuit, accusing him of causing losses. In court, they expected silence. Instead, Marcus revealed the truth. He hadn't broken the company. He had been the one holding it together. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. A cold wind swept through Manhattan, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the sharp echo of footsteps against wet pavement. It was early morning, the kind where the sky remained a dull gray long after sunrise, and the city moved faster than the people inside it. Inside a glass office tower on Madison Avenue, lights were already on, long before most employees arrived. Marcus Bennett was there. As always, Marcus was a 39-year-old black man with a tall, broad-shouldered frame built from years of discipline rather than vanity. His presence was steady, grounded. He had deep brown skin, short, closely cropped black hair with faint strands of gray at the temples, and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a calm, unreadable expression. His eyes, dark brown, observant, missed very little. He dressed simply, a well-worn navy suit, slightly faded at the cuffs, paired with a plain white shirt. Nothing about him demanded attention, and that was exactly how the company had come to see him. Reliable, quiet, replaceable, but they were wrong. Marcus stood by the window, one hand resting lightly on the edge of his desk, scanning through a document on his tablet. The numbers didn't add up. They never did, not when they came from someone else's rushed work. He sighed softly. Then he fixed it. The firm was called Coleman & Burke Consulting, one of the most respected advisory companies in New York. They specialized in corporate recovery, stepping into failing deals and turning them around. And behind more than half of their biggest recoveries was Marcus. He just wasn't the one shaking hands in the final meeting. "Morning, Marcus." The voice came from behind him. Liam Carter stepped into the office, slightly out of breath, his coat still damp from the rain outside. Liam was 26, tall, but still carrying the awkwardness of someone who hadn't quite grown into himself yet. He had light skin, sandy brown hair that he constantly ran his hands through when nervous, and clear blue eyes that revealed more emotion than he intended. His suits were always a little too new, his posture a little too eager. He was smart, hard-working, and completely unaware of how this place really worked. "Morning," Marcus replied without turning. "You're early." Liam gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "Trying to be." Marcus finally looked at him, just briefly. "That client report you submitted last night?" Marcus said, his tone calm but direct. "You missed a liability projection in Section 3. Liam froze. What?" Marcus tapped his tablet, then turned it slightly so Liam could see. "The numbers from Q2 don't match the restructuring plan. If they'd gone into the meeting like that, the client would have pulled out." Liam's face drained of color. "I didn't even see that." "I know." There was no judgment in Marcus's voice, no irritation, just fact. Marcus handed him the corrected version. "I fixed it," he said, "but don't rely on that." Liam swallowed, nodding quickly. "Thank you. Seriously, I don't know what I would have—" "You would have learned," Marcus cut in gently. "Just not the easy way." Liam let out a breath, half relieved, half embarrassed. "Still, I owe you." Marcus gave a faint, almost invisible smile. "No, you just owe the next person you help." That was how Marcus worked. He didn't build loyalty, he built people. Across the office floor, a few more employees began to arrive, their voices slowly filling the space with low conversation and the clicking of keyboards. At the far end of the room, Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her glass-walled office. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and sharply dressed, with straight blonde hair cut precisely at shoulder length. Her features were defined, almost severe. High cheekbones, narrow eyes, and a posture that always leaned slightly forward as if she were perpetually assessing everything around her. She had built her career on the efficiency and control, and on knowing exactly who mattered, and who didn't. Her eyes briefly passed over Marcus. No greeting, no acknowledgement. Then she continued walking. Liam noticed. He hesitated, then leaned closer to Marcus. Does she always do that? Marcus didn't even look up. Yes. That's kinda rude. Marcus shrugged slightly. It's efficient. Liam frowned. I don't get it. He stopped himself. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm what? Liam hesitated again, then shook his head. Nothing. Marcus returned to his work. But inside he already knew what Liam had almost said. You're better than most of them. He had heard it before. Just never from the people who decided anything. The day moved quickly. Meetings came and went. Names were mentioned. Deals were discussed. And in every room, someone presented a solution Marcus had already built. He sat in the back of one meeting, silent, watching as a senior consultant confidently explained a recovery strategy. Word for word what Marcus had drafted the night before. The client nodded. Impressed. Brilliant approach, the client said. The consultant smiled. Thank you. Marcus said nothing. By the time evening came, the office had begun to empty. Lights dimmed one by one. Desks were abandoned. But Marcus stayed. He always stayed. Hours later, the building was nearly silent. Only the faint hum of air conditioning and the distant echo of elevators remained. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes for a moment before turning back to his screen. Another report. Another problem someone else had overlooked. He fixed it. Of course he did. At home, across the river in a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, a soft light glowed in the kitchen. Evelyn Bennett sat at the small wooden table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Evelyn was 72, a petite woman with a gentle presence that filled the room more than her size ever could. Her skin was a warm, deep brown, marked with the soft lines of time rather than hardship. Her silver-gray hair was kept short and natural, framing a face that always seemed to carry both kindness and quiet strength. She had spent most of her life working as a school aide. She had never been wealthy, but she had always been certain of one thing. Her son deserved more than the world gave him. The door opened softly. Marcus stepped in, loosening his tie slightly. "You're still up," he said. Evelyn smiled. "I was waiting." Marcus shook his head lightly, setting his bag down. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said. "I want to." He walked into the kitchen, sitting across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You look tired." Marcus exhaled quietly. "Long day." "You say that every day." He gave a faint smile. "Because it's true every day." She didn't smile back. Instead, she reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You're still giving them everything, aren't you?" Marcus didn't answer right away, then, "It's just work." Evelyn shook her head gently. "No," she said, "it's not." Her eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. "You build things for people who don't even see you." Marcus looked down at the table. "I don't need them to see me." Evelyn squeezed his hand slightly. "That's not the same as not deserving it." Back at the office the next morning, the cycle began again. New emails, new problems, new praise. For the same wrong people. Marcus walked in quietly, placing his bag down as Liam rushed over. "You're not going to believe this," Liam said, excitement in his voice. "What?" "They're presenting the Jefferson account today, the big one. The one you—" He stopped himself again. Marcus looked at him calmly. "The one I what?" Liam hesitated. "Helped with." Marcus nodded once. "Good." Liam stared at him. "That's it?" Marcus picked up his tablet. "That's it." But as he walked toward the conference room, something shifted, just slightly. Not anger, not frustration, just awareness. Inside the room, executives gathered around the table. The presentation began. Slides appeared. Numbers, strategies, projections. All familiar. All his. Applause followed. Compliments were exchanged. Names were remembered. Just not his. Marcus stood near the back, silent, hands loosely at his sides, watching, listening, understanding. Because this was who he had become. Not the face of success, not the voice in the room, but the foundation everything stood on. And foundations were rarely seen. The rain had stopped, but the city still carried its weight. Outside the office tower, the streets of Manhattan shimmered under a thin layer of leftover water, reflecting distorted lights and hurried footsteps. Inside Coleman and Burke, the atmosphere felt sharper than usual, not louder but tighter, like something important was about to be announced. Marcus Bennett noticed it the moment he stepped out of the elevator. People were talking more than usual. Not openly, but in small clusters, leaning slightly closer than necessary. Eyes shifted. Voices dropped when someone walked by. He didn't ask why. He simply walked to his desk, set down his bag, and turned on his screen. Across the room, Liam Carter was already there, but unlike his usual focused posture, he kept glancing toward the main conference hall. Marcus sat down. "What's going on?" he asked calmly. Liam hesitated, then leaned closer. "They're announcing something today. Big recognition for the Jefferson account." Marcus nodded once. "I figured." Liam studied him carefully. "You don't seem curious." Marcus scrolled through his emails. "I know how it turned out," he said. Liam opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because that was the problem. Marcus always knew. And it never changed anything. At 10 o'clock sharp, an internal announcement was sent out. All staff were asked to gather in the main conference room. The room filled quickly. Rows of employees sat shoulder to shoulder, some with anticipation, others with practiced indifference. At the front stood Richard Coleman, the company's chairman. Richard was a man in his early 60s, tall with a commanding but aging presence. His silver hair was always perfectly combed back, his posture straight in a way that suggested control rather than comfort. His face was sharp, his smile rehearsed, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had spent decades being listened to. Next to him stood Sarah Mitchell, composed as always, her expression unreadable. Marcus took a seat near the back. Liam sat beside him. Then the presentation began. Slides appeared on the large screen, highlighting the Jefferson account. A major recovery, a turning point for the company. Figures rose, losses reversed, contracts stabilized, every detail Marcus had spent weeks constructing. He watched silently. Then Richard spoke. "This success," Richard said, his voice steady and authoritative, "represents the kind of excellence we strive for at Coleman and Burke." A pause. "And today, we recognize the individual whose presence made the difference." Marcus didn't move. He didn't need to. He already knew what came next. "Daniel Whitmore." Applause erupted. Daniel Whitmore stood up from the front row, adjusting his suit slightly as he made his way to the stage. Daniel was in his early 30s, tall, with a polished, confident appearance. His light brown hair was neatly styled, his skin fair, his smile easy and practiced. He had the kind of presence that fit naturally into rooms like this. Comfortable, visible, expected. He wasn't incompetent, but he wasn't exceptional either, not like Marcus. Daniel shook Richard's hand, then turned to face the room. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth. "This project was a team effort, but I'm honored to represent the work we've all done." Marcus watched him. There was no anger in his expression, only stillness. Because Daniel wasn't lying. He just wasn't telling the whole truth. Beside Marcus, Liam's hands tightened slightly. "This is wrong," he whispered. Marcus didn't respond. "They know you did most of that work," Liam continued, his voice low but tense. "Everyone knows." Marcus glanced at him briefly. "Not everyone," he said quietly. Liam frowned. What does that mean? Marcus looked back at the stage. It means knowing something and saying something are not the same. Liam sat back, unsettled. At the edge of the room, near the side wall, a woman stood quietly with a tablet in her hands. Sophia Lee. She had been observing the entire presentation without taking her eyes off the stage. Sophia was in her early 30s, of Asian American descent, with a calm, composed demeanor that often made people underestimate how much she noticed. She had straight black hair that fell just past her shoulders, soft but focused dark eyes, and a slim build that gave her an almost unobtrusive presence in a room. She worked in human resources, and she paid attention. More than most. Sophia had joined the company 5 years earlier, full of idealism. She believed in structure, fairness, accountability, but over time, she had learned something uncomfortable. Policies didn't always protect people. Sometimes they protected systems, and right now, she was watching one of those systems in motion. Her eyes briefly shifted toward Marcus. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't reacting. He was simply there, invisible in plain sight. Sophia pressed her lips together slightly. She said nothing, but she remembered. The applause faded. The meeting ended. People began to disperse, some energized, others indifferent. Daniel was immediately surrounded. Congratulations, handshakes, laughter. Great job, man. You killed it. Well deserved. Marcus walked past the crowd without slowing down. No one stopped him. No one called his name. Back at his desk, he resumed work as if nothing had happened. Emails, reports, corrections, the same rhythm. Across from him, Liam sat frozen for a moment before finally speaking. You're just okay with this? Marcus didn't look up. It already happened. That's not the point, Liam said, frustration rising. You should say something. Marcus paused, then leaned back slightly in his chair. And say what? The truth. Marcus studied him for a moment. Then he asked quietly, Who are you saying it for? Liam blinked. What? Marcus's voice remained calm. If I say it, does it change anything? Or does it just make you feel better for hearing it? Liam didn't have an answer, because deep down, he knew. Later that afternoon, in a smaller office on the 10th floor, Sophia sat across from her manager reviewing internal reports. Her manager, Thomas Green, was a man in his late 40s, slightly overweight with thinning hair and a tired expression. He had been in HR long enough to understand how things worked, and long enough to stop trying to change them. Sophia scrolled through the Jefferson account documentation, names, contributions, timelines. She paused. Marcus's name appeared. Again, and again, and again, but not where it mattered, not in the final report, not in the presentation, not in the recognition. She looked up. Thomas, she said carefully, why wasn't Marcus Bennett listed as a lead contributor? Thomas didn't even look at the screen. Because he wasn't client-facing. That's not the same as not leading the work. Thomas sighed. It's how the company defines visibility. Sophia frowned slightly. That doesn't make it right. Thomas finally looked at her. No, he said quietly, it doesn't. A pause, but it makes it consistent. Sophia leaned back, unsatisfied, because consistency wasn't fairness. That evening, the office emptied again. But unlike the night before, something felt different. Not in the company, in the people. Liam stayed later than usual, watching Marcus work. Fixing numbers, rewriting projections, cleaning up details that no one else would even notice. Why do you keep doing it? Liam asked suddenly. Marcus didn't stop typing. Doing what? Fixing everything. For them. Marcus finished a line, then leaned back slightly. Because the work matters, he said. Liam shook his head. But they don't see you. Marcus's expression didn't change. I see the work. Liam fell silent. At home, Evelyn Bennett sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. When Marcus entered, she turned slightly. "You're late." "Long day," he said. She studied his face carefully. "They recognized someone else, didn't they?" Marcus paused, then gave a small nod. Evelyn sighed softly. "I'm sorry." Marcus shrugged lightly, placing his keys down. "It's fine." But this time, for just a moment, it didn't sound as certain. The city had turned colder overnight. A sharp wind cut through the streets of Manhattan, rattling loose signs and pushing people forward with quiet urgency. Inside Coleman and Burke, however, the atmosphere was not cold. It was charged. Something important was coming, and everyone could feel it. Marcus Bennett felt it too. But unlike the others, he didn't lean into the anticipation. He simply walked through it. At 8:15 a.m., he stepped into the office as he always did. Calm, composed, already thinking 3 steps ahead of the work waiting for him. But today, conversations didn't stop when he passed. Instead, they shifted. Subtle glances, unfinished sentences, quiet recognition that something involving him was already in motion. Liam Carter was waiting at his desk. Not sitting. Waiting. The moment Marcus approached, Liam stood straighter. "They're opening the Director of Operations role," Liam said almost too quickly. "Official announcement later today." Marcus placed his bag down. "I heard rumors." "It's not rumors anymore," Liam said. "Everyone's talking about it." Marcus turned on his screen. "Good," he replied simply. Liam stared at him. "That's it? You're not even excited?" Marcus finished for him. Liam nodded. Marcus paused, then gave a small, thoughtful shrug. "I've learned not to get ahead of decisions I don't control." Liam frowned slightly. "But this one, you should. Everyone knows you're the best choice." Marcus didn't respond, because he had heard that before, and it had never mattered. By mid-morning, the announcement was official. An internal memo confirmed the opening of the Director of Operations position, a role that would oversee all major client strategy, internal execution, and high-level decision-making. In other words, the role Marcus had already been doing, informally, unrecognized, unpaid. Throughout the office, conversations grew louder. Names were mentioned, predictions made, but one name kept surfacing more than the others: Marcus Bennett. Even people who rarely spoke to him acknowledged it now. He's basically been running operations anyway. No one knows the system like he does. It's obvious. For once, the truth wasn't hidden. It just hadn't been decided yet. In a glass conference room on the upper floor, a smaller, more important meeting was already underway. Richard Coleman sat at the head of the table, fingers lightly pressed together. Beside him was Sarah Mitchell, composed as always, her posture straight, her eyes sharp. Across from them sat 2 senior partners and a visiting advisor, Michael Reeves. Michael Reeves was a corporate consultant brought in occasionally for objective assessments. He was in his early 50s, tall, with a lean build, wearing a dark tailored suit. His face was narrow, his expression analytical, and his eyes carried the detached curiosity of someone who evaluated people more as assets than individuals. He flipped through a file. "Marcus Bennett," he said. "Strong record, consistent performance, high retention impact on clients." Sarah nodded slightly. "He's been essential," she admitted. Richard remained silent. Michael continued. "Then I assume he's the leading candidate." There was a pause, a small one, but noticeable. Richard finally leaned back in his chair. "He's a candidate," he said carefully. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Is there a stronger one?" Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he chose his words. "There are considerations beyond performance." Sarah's eyes flicked toward him briefly. Michael closed the file. "Such as?" Another pause, then Richard spoke, his tone calm, measured. "Some clients may not feel comfortable." The room went quiet, not shocked, just still, because everyone understood what he meant, even if no one said it directly. Michael studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "I see." Sarah said nothing, but her expression hardened, just slightly. Downstairs, Marcus sat at his desk reviewing a restructuring model when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Marcus Bennett." There was a brief silence. Then a familiar voice. "Marcus, it's David Lang." Marcus leaned back slightly. David Lang was a longtime client, mid-50s with a calm but firm presence. He had short gray hair, a slightly weathered face from years in manufacturing leadership, and a voice that carried quiet authority. He was not easily impressed, and he didn't trust easily. "David," Marcus said, "didn't expect your call." "I'll be direct," David replied. "I heard your company's making some changes." Marcus glanced at the screen in front of him. "They usually are." A faint chuckle on the other end. "I also heard you might not be the one leading them." Marcus didn't respond. David continued. "That would be a mistake." Marcus's expression remained neutral. "I don't make those decisions." "No," David said, "but I do." Marcus's eyes shifted slightly. "If you're not the one handling our account moving forward, we'll reconsider our position." A quiet statement, but a heavy one. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You don't have to do that." "I do," David replied. "Because I don't trust systems. I trust people." A pause. "And you're the only reason we stayed." The line went quiet for a moment, then, "Think about what you're worth, Marcus." The call ended. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he placed it down and went back to work. On another floor, Sophia Lee sat alone in a small meeting room, her laptop open, documents spread across the table. She wasn't scheduled to be there, but she had started noticing patterns, and once she noticed them, she couldn't unsee them. She reviewed internal promotion records, names, timelines, outcomes. Her brow furrowed. Then she opened a separate folder, notes she had begun keeping quietly over the past year, meeting summaries, comments, decisions that didn't align with performance data. She added a new entry. Discussion regarding director role, performance acknowledged, but external perception cited as concern. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed one more line. Pattern consistent with previous internal decisions. She stopped, looked at the screen, then saved the file. Sophia leaned back in her chair, her expression no longer neutral. Now, it was conflicted. By late afternoon, the office felt heavier, not louder, just aware. Liam sat across from Marcus, trying to focus on his work, but failing. Finally, he spoke. "They're not going to give it to you, are they?" Marcus didn't look up. "I don't know." Liam shook his head. "I think you do." Marcus paused, then closed the file in front of him. "What I know," he said calmly, "is that decisions like this aren't always about what's obvious." Liam leaned forward. "That's not right." Marcus met his eyes. "No," he said, "it isn't." A silence followed. Then Liam asked quietly, "Then why stay?" Marcus didn't answer, because for the first time, he didn't have one. That evening, as the city lights flickered on and the wind outside grew colder, an email was sent. Short, formal, final. The decision had been made. The director of operations position would be filled internally, but not by Marcus Bennett. No explanation, just a name, someone else. Marcus read the email once, then closed it. No reaction, no expression, just stillness. Across from him, Liam stared at his own screen in disbelief. This doesn't make any sense." Marcus stood up, adjusting his jacket. "It doesn't have to," he said quietly. And for the first time, there was something different in his voice, not anger, not sadness, just clarity. The morning came quieter than usual, not because the city had slowed, New York never did, but because something inside Marcus Bennett had. The wind outside had softened, the sky a pale gray stretched thin between buildings, and the streets carried their usual rhythm. But for Marcus, the noise felt distant, like it belonged to a world he was no longer fully part of. He arrived at the office at the same time as always. Same elevator, same floor, same desk, but nothing felt the same. Marcus placed his bag down gently, his movements calm, deliberate. He turned on his computer, opened a report, scanned a few lines, then stopped, not because the work was difficult, not because something was wrong, but because, for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fix it. Across from him, Liam Carter noticed immediately. Liam had barely slept. His usual energy was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that sat heavily on his shoulders. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his tie uneven. Small details Marcus would normally point out. But today, Marcus said nothing. "You saw the email," Liam said, his voice low. Marcus nodded once. "And you're just here?" Liam asked. Marcus looked at the screen, then slowly closed the file. "I had some things to finish," he said. Liam leaned forward. "That's not what I mean." Marcus finally met his eyes. "I know." There was a pause, then Liam spoke again, more carefully this time. "They don't deserve you." Marcus didn't respond right away, because it wasn't about what they deserved. It was about what he accepted. By mid-morning, the office was moving as if nothing had happened. The new director's name was already being used in emails. Meetings were reassigned, titles adjusted. The system had corrected itself. Marcus watched it all with quiet clarity. No anger, no resistance, just understanding. Around noon, Sarah Mitchell approached his desk. She stood straight as always, her presence sharp and controlled. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, each step measured. When she stopped in front of Marcus, she didn't sit. "Marcus," she said. He looked up. "I assume you've seen the announcement." "I have." A brief silence followed. Then Sarah continued. "You're still expected to transition your current projects." Marcus nodded. "Of course." Sarah studied him for a moment, as if trying to read something beneath the surface. "You're handling this professionally," she said. Marcus gave a faint, neutral expression. "It's just work." For a split second, something flickered in Sarah's eyes. Not guilt, not quite, but something close to recognition. Then it was gone. "Good," she said, before turning and walking away. Marcus watched her leave. Because even she, who saw everything, still chose not to say it. That afternoon, Marcus requested a short meeting. Not with the team. Not with Sarah. With Richard Coleman. Richard's office was exactly as expected. Clean, controlled, designed to impress without revealing anything personal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but the blinds were partially drawn, muting the light. Richard stood behind his desk when Marcus entered. "Marcus," he said, gesturing to the chair, "sit." Marcus remained standing. "This won't take long." Richard paused, then nodded slightly. "Go ahead." Marcus reached into his folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. A resignation letter. Richard didn't touch it immediately. Instead, he looked at Marcus. "This is about the promotion." Marcus shook his head slightly. "No." A pause. "It's about everything that made the promotion predictable." Richard's expression tightened, just slightly. "You're a valuable asset to this company." Marcus almost smiled. "An asset," he repeated quietly. Richard continued, his tone measured. "We can revisit your position in the future." Marcus looked at him directly. "With the same considerations." Silence. That was answer enough. Marcus nodded once. "I've learned a lot here," he said, "but I think I've learned enough." Richard finally picked up the letter. "You're making a mistake," he said. Marcus didn't argue, because maybe he was, but it was his to make. Back on the main floor, Liam saw him coming from a distance. The moment Marcus approached, Liam stood up. "You talked to him?" Marcus nodded. "And?" Marcus placed his empty folder on the desk. "I'm leaving." Liam's face went still. "What?" I've submitted my resignation. For a second, Liam didn't react. Then, I'm leaving too. The words came out too fast, too certain. Marcus shook his head immediately. No. Liam frowned. What do you mean, no? I'm not staying here after what they did to you. Marcus stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. This isn't about me. It is, Liam insisted. You're the reason I even— And you're the reason you should stay, Marcus cut in. Liam stopped, confused. Marcus continued. You're still learning. You're still building something. Not here, Liam said. Marcus held his gaze, especially here. Liam shook his head. That doesn't make sense. Marcus gave a small, knowing look. It will. A pause. Don't leave because of me. Leave when you know why you're leaving. Liam said nothing, because deep down, he knew Marcus was right, even if he didn't like it. Across the building, in a quiet corner office, Sophia Lee sat alone again. But this time, she wasn't just observing. She was collecting. Her laptop screen displayed internal communications, emails, meeting notes, performance reports. Patterns were becoming clearer, more defined. She had started organizing them. Dates, decisions, discrepancies. Her fingers moved carefully, deliberately, not rushed, not careless, because she understood what this was. Not proof yet, but the beginning of it. She paused for a moment, looking at Marcus's name in multiple documents, always present, never credited. Her expression tightened slightly. Then, she created a new folder. She named it simply Internal Review. No one else knew it existed. Yet, that evening, Marcus returned home earlier than usual. The apartment was quiet. Evelyn Bennett sat by the window again. The soft glow of the city reflecting in her eyes, she turned as he entered. You're early. Marcus loosened his jacket, placing it gently over the chair. I won't be working late anymore. Evelyn studied him carefully. Then she understood. You left. Marcus nodded. For a moment she said nothing. Then she stood up slowly, walking toward him. You didn't argue, she said. No. You didn't fight it. No? She stopped in front of him and smiled. Softly, proudly. Good. Marcus exhaled, a weight lifting from somewhere deep inside him. I thought you might be worried. Evelyn shook her head. You didn't lose anything, she said. She placed her hand gently on his arm. You just stopped giving it to the wrong people. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt still, not tired, not burdened, just still. The city no longer felt like a race to Marcus Bennett. For the first time in years, the mornings came without urgency. The streets outside still moved with their usual intensity. Yellow cabs cutting through traffic, hurried footsteps echoing between buildings. But inside Marcus, there was a quiet that hadn't existed before. It had been 2 weeks since he left Coleman and Burke. 2 weeks of distance. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks of finally seeing things clearly. Marcus sat at a small wooden table in his apartment, a cup of coffee cooling beside him as he reviewed a notebook filled with ideas. Independent consulting, smaller clients, rebuilding something on his own terms. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't chasing. He was choosing. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He stared at it for a moment before answering. Marcus Bennett. A pause. Then a voice, formal, measured. Mr. Bennett, this is Andrew Keller, representing Coleman and Burke Consulting. Marcus leaned back slightly. Andrew Keller was a corporate attorney, known in legal circles for his precision and cold efficiency. In his early 40s, he had a lean, angular face, sharp blue eyes, and a voice that carried no wasted emotion. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. I'm calling to inform you that the company has filed a legal claim against you. Marcus didn't react outwardly. On what grounds? Breach of contract, professional misconduct, and financial damages related to the Jefferson account. Silence. Then Marcus spoke. I see. Keller continued. The company is prepared to pursue full legal action. However, they are open to resolution if you agree to cooperate. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. Cooperate how? A formal acknowledgement of responsibility, followed by a negotiated return under revised terms. There it was. Not justice. Control. Marcus exhaled slowly. I'll review the claim, he said calmly. Of course, Keller replied. You'll receive the documentation shortly. The call ended. Marcus lowered the phone. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then, he gave a small, almost quiet nod, as if confirming something he had already known. Across the city, inside the glass walls of Coleman and Burke, things were not as controlled as they appeared. Daniel Whitmore stood in the middle of a conference room, staring at a screen filled with numbers that refused to cooperate. His posture, once confident, had begun to stiffen. His movements were sharper now, less fluid. The easy smile he used to carry had faded into something tighter, forced, uncertain. Run that again, he said, his voice slightly strained. A junior analyst adjusted the data. It's still not aligning, she said carefully. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. That doesn't make sense. Because it didn't. Not to him, but it would have to someone else. Someone who understood the system the way Marcus did. Daniel turned away from the screen, pacing slightly. Where's the backup model? He asked. Another analyst hesitated. That was handled by Marcus before. The room went quiet. Daniel stopped walking. For a moment, no one spoke, because everyone felt it now. The absence. Later that day, Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at the closed door in front of him. His reflection in the glass looked different, less certain, less in control. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, because deep down, he knew he wasn't filling Marcus's role. He was standing in it, and it was starting to collapse under him. On the main floor, Liam Carter sat at his desk, barely touching his keyboard. An email had been sent to him that morning. A request. No, a directive. He was asked to provide a formal statement regarding Marcus Bennett's handling of the Jefferson account. Liam read it again. And again. Each time it felt heavier. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. They want me to testify, he said quietly. Across from him, a colleague looked up. About what? Liam hesitated. About Marcus. The colleague shifted uncomfortably. Well, just tell them what happened. Liam gave a hollow laugh. That's the problem. He didn't know what they wanted him to say, or rather, he did. And it wasn't the truth. That evening, Liam sat alone at a small bar near his apartment, a glass of untouched drink in front of him. The place was dimly lit, quiet enough for thoughts to grow louder than they should. Behind the counter stood the bartender, an older man named Frank Doyle. Frank was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with a worn but steady presence. His gray beard was thick, his hands large and practiced from years of work. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. He glanced at Liam. You've been staring at that drink for 10 minutes, Frank said. Liam exhaled. Work. Frank nodded once. Usually is. Liam looked down. They want me to say something that isn't true. Frank wiped the counter slowly. And what do you want to say? Liam didn't answer, because for the first time, he wasn't sure. In another part of the city, Sophia Lee sat in her apartment, her laptop open, documents spread across her table. But tonight, it felt different. Heavier, more real. She had seen the legal filing. Not officially, but enough to understand what was happening. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Files open, evidence building. Patterns undeniable, but none of it mattered. Unless she used it. Sophia leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. She had always believed in fairness, in systems, in doing things the right way, but now she was standing at a line. On one side, silence, safety. On the other, truth. Risk. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. She opened it. A single line. "You know what they're doing isn't right." No name, no explanation, but she didn't need one because she did know. Back in his apartment, Marcus sat at the same table, the legal documents now open in front of him. Page after page, accusations, claims, distorted timelines. He read everything. Carefully, thoroughly, the way he always did, and as he read, something became clear. They weren't just blaming him. They were rewriting what had happened. Marcus closed the file slowly, then opened his notebook, not to defend himself, not yet, but to remember every detail, every decision, every moment they had overlooked, because if they wanted a story, he would give them the truth. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sharp, unforgiving chill. Manhattan's courthouse stood heavy and still against the pale winter sky, its stone steps worn by decades of footsteps, some confident, some uncertain, all carrying stories of conflict and consequence. The air felt different here, not rushed like the streets, not quiet like Marcus's apartment, but weighted, measured. Marcus Bennett stood at the base of the steps for a moment before walking in. He wore a simple dark suit, the same one he had worn to countless meetings before, nothing new, nothing designed to impress. His posture was straight, his expression calm. But there was something else now. Clarity. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to tell the truth. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was restrained but tense. Rows of wooden benches filled gradually, company representatives, a few employees, and observers who had heard about the case. At the front, the judge's bench stood elevated, commanding silence even before anyone spoke. At the right side of the room sat Andrew Keller, the company's attorney, his documents neatly arranged. His sharp eyes scanned the room, calculating, prepared. Beside him sat Richard Coleman, composed but quieter than usual, his posture stiff, his gaze fixed forward. On the opposite side, Marcus sat alone, no legal team, no assistant. Just a folder of notes placed neatly in front of him. A few people in the room noticed. Some were confused. Others understood. Liam Carter sat in the second row, his hands clasped tightly together. His face carried a tension that hadn't left him for days. Eyes slightly tired, shoulders rigid, as if he were holding something too heavy to set down. He hadn't slept well, not since the email, not since the request, and not since he made his decision. Near the back of the room, Sophia Lee entered quietly, carrying a slim folder pressed close to her chest. Her usual composed demeanor remained, but her eyes were sharper now, more focused. She wore a simple dark blazer, her hair neatly tied back. Nothing about her appearance drew attention, but what she carried would. She took a seat, her gaze briefly finding Marcus. He gave a small nod. Nothing more. But it was enough. The judge entered. Judge Harold Whitman, a man in his early 60s, tall with a dignified presence, silver gray hair neatly combed and a face marked by years of careful listening. His eyes were sharp, but not cold, carrying a sense of balance rather than authority for its own sake. He took his seat. The courtroom stood, then settled. The hearing began. Andrew Keller rose first. His voice was controlled, precise, every word placed with intention. Your Honor, this case concerns a former employee who violated contractual obligations, leading to significant financial loss and reputational damage. He paced slowly, measured. Mr. Bennett abandoned a critical project, failed to fulfill his duties, and directly contributed to the collapse of a major client agreement. He paused. Furthermore, his actions disrupted internal operations, causing measurable harm to the company. Each statement landed cleanly, structured, convincing, on the surface. Marcus listened without interruption. No reaction, no expression, only attention. When Keller finished, the judge turned his gaze. Mr. Bennett, he said, you have chosen to represent yourself. Do you understand the responsibility that carries? Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor. And how do you respond to these claims? Marcus placed his hands lightly on the table, then spoke. calmly, clearly. "I don't deny that I left the company," he said, "but I do deny everything else." A slight shift in the room. Marcus continued, "I did not abandon the project. I completed it." Keller's expression tightened slightly. Marcus opened his folder. "I'd like to present documentation showing the final restructuring plan submitted before my departure, approved internally, and delivered to the client." He handed the documents forward. The judge reviewed them briefly, then nodded. "Proceed." Marcus moved carefully, not rushed, not defensive. Each piece of evidence was placed with intention. Timelines, emails, internal approvals. "On this date," Marcus said, "the project was at risk due to inaccurate projections submitted by another team." He paused. "I corrected those projections." He turned a page. "On this date, the client raised concerns regarding stability." Another page. "I addressed those concerns and secured their continued engagement," Keller interjected. "That does not negate the fact that the contract was ultimately lost." Marcus looked at him. "No," he said calmly. "It explains why it wasn't lost sooner." A ripple moved through the room. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Continue, Mr. Bennett." Marcus took a breath, then spoke again. "The claim is that I caused financial damage, but the documents show that the project remained stable until after my departure." He paused. "After I left, the structure I built was changed." Silence. Because everyone in the room understood what that meant. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened. Heads turned. A man stepped inside David Lang. He walked with steady confidence, his coat still carrying the chill from outside. His expression was serious, focused. Keller frowned slightly. "This is unexpected." David approached the front. "I requested to be here," he said. The judge studied him. "And you are?" "David Lang, former client involved in the Jefferson account." The judge nodded. "You may speak." David turned slightly toward the room. "I want to clarify something," he said. "The decision to withdraw from the contract was not made because of Mr. Bennett." A pause. "It was made after he left." The room fell silent. David continued. "He was the only person we trusted to manage that project." His gaze shifted briefly to Marcus, and when he was gone, so was our confidence. Keller adjusted his stance but said nothing, because there was nothing clean to counter. From the back row, Sophia stood. Her movement was quiet, but deliberate. "Your Honor," she said, "I have documentation relevant to internal decision-making processes." The judge nodded. "Approach." Sophia walked forward, placing her folder on the table. Her voice remained steady. "These records show that Mr. Bennett's contributions were consistently excluded from official reports, despite being central to project execution." She opened the file, and they also show that concerns unrelated to performance influenced leadership decisions. She didn't need to say more, because the implication was clear. Liam sat frozen. His heart pounded. This was the moment. He stood. His voice wasn't perfect, but it was real. "I worked with Marcus," he said. All eyes turned. "He didn't break anything," Liam continued. "He fixed everything." A pause. He stayed late. "He corrected mistakes no one else even noticed. That project worked because of him." His hands tightened slightly. "And after he left, we couldn't keep it together." Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. Marcus stood quietly at his place, not triumphant, not vindicated, just present, because this was never about winning. It was about truth. The judge leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. He looked at the documents, at the witnesses, at Marcus. Then he spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, the claims against Mr. Bennett are not supported in the way they were asserted." A pause. "The court will review all documentation further, but it is clear that responsibility in this matter is not one-sided." He looked toward Keller. "Proceedings will reflect that." Marcus sat down slowly. Not relieved, not emotional, just steady, because he already knew. The truth didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be clear. The city felt different again, not because New York had changed, but because the story within it had. A few days after the courtroom hearing, the air carried a strange, quiet tension. News of the case had not exploded into headlines, but within the circles that mattered, clients, partners, industry insiders, it had spread, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough. Truth had a way of traveling. Marcus Bennett walked through to the same streets he had walked for years, but this time, he wasn't heading toward obligation. He was walking toward something undefined, and for the first time that didn't bother him. Inside Coleman and Burke, the atmosphere had shifted in ways no one openly discussed. Meetings were shorter, conversations more careful, decisions less certain. Richard Coleman sat in his office, the same office that once felt immovable, now carrying a weight he could not ignore. His posture remained straight, his suit perfectly pressed, but the confidence behind it had thinned. On his desk lay a single document, the withdrawal notice. The lawsuit against Marcus Bennett officially dropped. He stared at it for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't controlling the outcome. Marcus was invited back to the office that afternoon, not as an employee, but as someone they now needed to speak to, carefully. When he entered the building, the receptionist, who had barely acknowledged him before, now greeted him with a polite, almost hesitant smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett." Marcus nodded once. No change in his expression, but everything else had changed. In the executive conference room, Richard Coleman stood waiting. Sarah Mitchell was there as well, standing slightly to the side, her posture still composed, but her expression quieter than usual. Marcus entered, closed the door behind him. No one rushed to speak. Finally, Richard stepped forward. "The company has decided to withdraw all legal claims," he said. Marcus nodded. "I expected that." Richard's jaw tightened slightly. Then he continued. "We would like to offer you a position." A pause. "Director of Operations." Another pause. "With full authority, compensation adjustment, structural support." Everything Marcus had been denied before, now placed in front of him. Marcus didn't sit, didn't reach for the offer. Instead, he looked at Richard. Why now? The question was calm, but it carried weight. Richard exhaled slowly. "Because we recognize your value." Marcus held his gaze. "You recognized it before." Silence. Richard didn't argue, because he couldn't. Sarah stepped forward slightly. Her voice was controlled, but softer than before. "This is an opportunity to move forward," she said. Marcus looked at her. "For who?" Sarah paused, and for the first time, she didn't have a precise answer. Marcus let the silence settle. Then he spoke. "I appreciate the offer." A small shift in the room, but then, "I'm not coming back." No anger, no hesitation, just finality. Richard straightened slightly. "You're making a decision based on emotion." Marcus shook his head. "No," he said, "I'm making it based on clarity." He stepped back slightly. "You didn't lose me when I left." A pause. "You lost me long before that." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Marcus turned toward the door, then stopped. Not to reconsider, but to finish. "I don't need to be where I have to prove my worth over and over again." He opened the door and left. Outside, the air felt lighter, not because anything had become easier, but because something had ended. That evening, Marcus met Liam Carter and Sophia Lee at a small cafe near the river. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't impressive, but it was quiet. And it was honest. Liam arrived first, his posture still carrying traces of uncertainty. But something had changed. His shoulders were straighter now, his voice steadier. The hesitation that once defined him had begun to fade. Sophia arrived shortly after, her expression calm as always, but her eyes sharper, more decisive. She carried herself differently now, no longer just observing systems, but ready to shape them. Marcus sat across from them. No formal meeting, no agenda, just a conversation. "So," Liam said, glancing between them. "What now?" Marcus leaned back slightly. "We build something better." Sophia nodded once. "Then we do it right." No one needed to define what that meant. They all understood. The early days were not easy. There was no large office, no established system. Just a small, rented space with 3 desks, a whiteboard, and more uncertainty than security, but there was something else. Respect. Every idea was heard, every contribution mattered, and for the first time, Marcus wasn't working in the background. He was leading. Clients began to notice. Not through advertising, not through announcements, but through trust. David Lang was the first to arrive. He walked into their small office one morning, looking around with a quiet approval. "This is different," he said. Marcus nodded. "It is." David smiled slightly. "Good, that's why I'm here." He placed a folder on the table. "Let's work." And just like that, it began. More followed. Not many at first, but enough. Because reputation doesn't disappear. It relocates. Liam grew quickly, not just in skill but in confidence. He no longer asked for validation. He contributed, decided, led. And one evening, as they reviewed a project together, Marcus looked at him and said, "You're not learning anymore." Liam frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Marcus gave a small nod. "You're ready." It wasn't a promotion. It was recognition. And Liam understood. Sophia built something less visible, but just as important. The company's culture, clear policies, transparent processes, no hidden decisions, no silent exclusions. She made sure of it, because she had seen what happened when systems looked fair but weren't. Months passed. Then a year. And slowly, the new company grew, not the largest, not the loudest, but one of the most trusted. Back at Coleman and Burke, things were different. Daniel Whitmore sat in his office staring at reports that never seemed to stabilize. Clients had left. Not dramatically, but steadily. The structure Marcus built had not survived without him. And Daniel knew it. Every day, Richard Coleman stood by his window one evening, looking out at the same city he had once controlled. But now, it looked different, because he knew what he had lost. And why. On a quiet afternoon, sunlight filtered softly through large windows into a new office space. Clean, open, alive. Marcus stood near the entrance, looking out at the city. Behind him, voices moved naturally. Liam discussing a strategy. Sophia reviewing a policy with a new hire. No tension. No silence. Just work. Real work. Marcus adjusted his jacket slightly. Not out of habit, but out of presence, because this time, he wasn't standing behind anything. He was standing at the front, and for the first time, exactly where he belonged. This story is not just about one man. It is about something we see every day but often choose to ignore. In life, there are many people like Marcus. They work quietly, give their best, carry responsibility without recognition, and still choose to do the right thing. Not because they are weak, but because they have discipline, dignity, and purpose. But there comes a moment when silence is no longer strength, and self-respect must come first. The lesson here is simple. Do not stay in places that only value your work, but not your worth. Do not confuse patience with acceptance of injustice, and do not wait for the world to recognize you before you recognize yourself. At the same time, this story reminds us how we treat others matters deeply. Fairness is not just a policy. It is a choice we make every day in how we speak, how we judge, and how we give credit. If we stay silent when something is wrong, we become part of the problem. In your daily life, take a moment to ask yourself, are you giving people the respect they deserve? Are you standing up when something is unfair? Are you building something meaningful or just staying comfortable? And if you are someone who has been overlooked, remember this. Your value does not decrease because someone else fails to see it. Keep growing, Keep preparing, and when the time comes, choose yourself. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what part of this story stayed with you. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire change and remind us what truly matters. May God bless everyone watching today. If you believe in truth, fairness, and new beginnings, comment Amen.